I'm going to come off video. And let us please welcome our colleague from Plymouth, England, one of the kindest and smartest guys you'll ever meet, Anthony Rayner.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, so thank you so much for attending today's Apex office hours. My name is Anthony Rayner. I work for the Apex development team, as Joel said, based in Plymouth in the UK. And we're here today to talk about building Apex apps for everybody. So trying to get the broadest reach and broadest audience for your Apex applications, and trying to make sure that we don't create barriers for people with certain abilities or disabilities, barriers to participation. So keeping them open and making sure they work great for all of your users. Okay, so without further ado, so today we're going to touch on a few things to do with 19.1, the upcoming release. So just to show the Oracle Safe Harbor slide, please don't make any buying decisions based on what we see today. And I will be demonstrating some of those things that are coming in 19.1 relevant to accessibility. So my name is Anthony Rayner, worked for the team for just over 13 years. Worked for Oracle for just over 13 years, and the development team for just over 10. And my work is sort of both front end and back end, more so on the front end JavaScript code in the last few years. But one of the key things is I'm the accessibility lead for the team. So I'm going to talk some more about that today. And there's my contact details, both on Twitter, Anthony Rayner, and my email address if you'd like to contact me. So what are we talking about today? We're really talking about you guys. So and the kind of huge, diverse population, not only Apex developers, we can see the vibrant UK community here from an event last year, but just anyone who's going to be interacting with your applications. Different abilities, different strengths, different weaknesses, different tools, different software, different languages. So there's a whole kind of diverse user base that we want to kind of build our Apex apps for. So that's the purpose of today, is to talk about how we can do that and how we can kind of put that lens, that accessibility lens over your Apex applications to see where things can be made better and where some of the common pitfalls are. So the World Health Organization offers a good definition of disability. And it starts with this, and that's basically describes a phenomenon of the interaction between a person's abilities and body features and disabilities, and how that matches to the society that they live in. So it kind of, if there's a match, then there's no barriers to participation, but sometimes there's a mismatch where someone's abilities might not map to what society or what a tool can provide. So that's the purpose here, is to sort of break down those barriers to make sure that we're not creating these mismatches. And if we dig a little bit deeper into what kinds of disability we're talking about, and this comes from the W3 organization, link at the bottom. So broadly categorized into 4 areas. There's auditory, which is hearing loss, partial hearing, cognitive, so neurological conditions, memory impairments, autistic spectrum, sensory processing disorders, learning disorders, kind of a neurodiverse selection of disorders and conditions that can affect your cognitive ability. Physical impairments, so kind of motor control, chronic pain, things like this, arthritis, paralysis, amputation, difficult physical disabilities. And visual, so probably what most people think about when they think of sort of testing for web accessibility. Screen readers often come up early in the conversation, and that's certainly a key part, but not the only part. So things like sight loss, full or partial, color blindness, these types of things. So how does that look? You might think, a sort of a fairly fixed, these things could be fairly fixed with different tools that are in place that might help people vote in this case, write stuff down, interact with a laptop, use a braille display, things that can enable people to still get the job done. But if we dig a little bit deeper into what disability is, and this is the second part of the World Health Organization's definition, it goes on to be a bit broader. And that's the key thing that I want to kind of get over today, is that it's not just about those sort of fixed disabilities that we talked about, but it also covers different impairments. They might be permanent, but they might be temporary. It could be an injury that someone's, a broken arm, for example, that someone's got for, with their arm in a cast for a few months, or it could be something situational where something's been forgotten, you've forgotten your mouse, or it could be you're using a touch device with no mouse, these sorts of things. So different kind of situations where impairments can come up and the potential for these mismatches can occur. So let's take an example. Hearing, for example. So the typical situation would be someone with permanent deafness who relies on other things, other ways of perceiving the world or an application. But it could be a temporary impairment, someone with an ear infection, for example, who can temporarily not hear properly. Or it could be situational. So, for example, in a busy restaurant in the evening and you're struggling to hear people, the bartender, you could be in different environments where it's difficult to hear. And a typical kind of technology that's evolved to help people with this is, which is a good example of a simple technical solution that can scale to many different situations, and that's subtitles. So subtitles initially were to help people with permanent disabilities hear and perceive film and TV film. But actually they're very useful in different situations. So someone with a temporary impairment, but also someone in a situational, with a situational impairment. You can see some people in this picture have got their headphones, but many haven't. Looking at devices, they might want to review some news videos, or watch some clips on their phone. Subtitles come to the rescue because you can still go through that, enjoy that without being a nuisance to the people around you, and everyone can still kind of get the content they need because of this, regardless of the situation that they're in. So that's a great example of how a simple technical solution can scale to many different situations. So the picture of disability begins to change a little bit, where we think, okay, so there's those sort of fixed disabilities that initially came to mind, but actually it might be someone who's broken their arm, who can't use their mouse for a few weeks or a few months, someone who's forgotten their glasses, who can't see the screen particularly well, or someone sitting in sunlight, perhaps in an office or on a mobile device, where both of those situations would benefit good, clear text with good contrast. So, one of the accessibility guidelines is around color contrast, and that's not just for people with poor vision, it's also for people in a temporary or a situation with a situational impairment. So it can really help more people than just that fixed number of people with a permanent disability. Again, someone with their mouse that's run out of battery, perhaps they've got a mouse that they can't charge whilst they're using it. A couple of hours without a mouse, they've got to use the keyboard. So these sort of things can crop up all the time. So it's not just about that estimated 15% of the world's population that have a permanent disability. A good example on the web would be keyboard support of a solution that is designed. You might initially think good keyboard support would benefit people who obviously can't use the mouse, absolutely. But if we dig into it a little bit deeper, it can also benefit people with a situational impairment, maybe using a touchscreen with no mouse, a temporary impairment like the mouse out of battery or the broken arm situation where they're reliant on the keyboard based on their situation. So addressing keyboard support on good keyboard support scales way beyond the scope of just people who might not be able to use the mouse because of a fixed disability. And actually keyboard support is so important in terms of accessibility because it's sort of the pillar of other things that won't work if there's not good keyboard support. So things like voice dictation software like Dragon, Naturally Speaking, or screen reader software like JAWS on Windows or VoiceOver or NVDA or other free screen readers, if there's not good keyboard support, you've got no chance. There's just no hope. So yeah, very important to get right. And that's also a good thing to do first in terms of accessibility testing is keyboard, because if you try and do things like more complex assistive technology testing before you do your keyboard testing, it's effectively null and void, because you know, if there's keyboard issues, they need to be sorted before you get to that stage of testing. So, as we talked about, everyone benefits from good keyboard support, simple solution that scales to many, many people, perhaps even everyone on your user base. And that includes power users as well. I didn't mention that before, but you know, people coming from a kind of a more of a command line background, or who are more used to using the keyboard, that don't like to go to the mouse. I've certainly come across many users like that. And good keyboard support, good keyboard shortcuts, being able to navigate quickly, do things without having to go to the mouse, benefit power users as well. So it has many, many good applications. Okay, so let's have a quick look at some common myths. We're going to go through some common myths, and then we're going to have a look at what Apex provides, and then show you a demo of a sample application, which I'm going to kind of put through some accessibility testing. And I've got some deliberate accessibility problems in there that we'll find and fix as we go through. But first, some myths. So this is something I've heard. Having no disabled users means we don't have to worry about it at the moment. A customer genuinely said that to me, and it's basically a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So if you don't have software and systems and tools that support accessibility and are available for people to use with different abilities, then that's going to be a problem. Either you know, worst case scenario, and you avoid hiring people with disabilities, which would be terrible. But better would be that you do hire, but there's going to be problems with the tools that you use, and then they're going to need to be brought up to support and work with different work for accessibility. So yeah. And also you're kind of missing out on that talent pool, right? A wonderfully diverse and smart selection of people, and an invaluable resource in terms of learning how to better your product, and how to make things better. We as sort of accessibility testers can kind of guess what things are like. We can do testing. I can test with a screen reader every now and again, but it pales into insignificance compared to someone who is using the tools from every day, day in, day out. We need to listen to these users and benefit from their experience and from their knowledge. So accessibility is the enemy of beautiful. Great quote from Leonie Watson, and she herself retorts it with, it's a creative challenge, not a challenge to creativity. So sometimes, when you're thinking about accessibility in terms of design, you have to change the design, stick to maybe certain color combinations where different colors may not provide sufficient contrast. So it's like it's an extra dimension that needs to be brought into your design, but it certainly shouldn't be considered, a challenge to a barrier to making something look great or work well, or not work in an elegant way. It's just another element of your design that needs to be brought in. So addressing accessibility is too expensive and too time consuming. And this really comes down to kind of the problem where it's considered more of an optional requirement. And I would encourage everyone to try and think about it in terms of a requirement, an integral part of your design, just as you would performance, security, usability. I would also put accessibility into that bracket of getting things done right the first time. If it's left, which it can happen, it does happen on projects where there might be accessibility issues which aren't fixed. But if it is left, then it's considered that sort of, okay, do we fix those now, or can we fix those later? It's sort of an optional cost that a project manager has to make a decision about whereas really, just like usability, performance and security, it should be built in and considered right from the start, and it will pay dividends in the long run. Accessible technical debt is particularly toxic when you're trying to retrofit accessibility. It can be done, but it's much easier if you consider it from the start. We don't have to address accessibility. And again, I've definitely heard that, but there are many kind of laws and mandates across the world. Section 508 was refreshed a few years ago. There's the American Disabilities Act, the European mandate, and I won't get into the details of law here, but there are many places in the world that already require either all public-facing websites or, in some cases, government or state sites or systems to be accessible and to meet the guidelines relevant to where you are. So definitely something to have a look at and think about and hopefully incorporate into your design. Okay, so how do we do this? So let's have a look. The WCAG 2 principles of accessibility are a good place to start. We at Oracle have our own set of accessibility guidelines, and they are somewhat based on the WCAG 2 guidelines. There's a link later in the slides to our official kind of statement about our accessibility guidelines, but they are based on WCAG 2. And the 4 kind of principles of accessibility that WCAG 2 define are that a system is perceivable, which means that it can be perceived by at least one of a user's senses. So for someone who can't see, for example, they can listen to the content, perhaps with a screen reader or a Braille output device. They can perceive the content in at least one way to one of their senses. It should be operable. The button should be clickable or activatable with the keyboard. You should be able to get around and use the functionality provided by the application with different technologies, keyboard, mouse, assistive technology. You should be able to operate the content. Understandable, so but you should be able to understand what's required of you, an error if it's occurred, for example, the text used to describe certain content, consistent navigation, clear and concise prose. A lot of it is good fundamental design anyway, but particularly important for someone who may have, say, cognitive issues with memory, where consistent navigation and clear prose is imperative to kind of keep them orientated. It's not just a nuisance, it's a sort of a barrier. So making sure things are understandable and robust. So that means that, so there's a sort of a party of 3 in terms of making something work. That's your Apex application or just web applications in general. The user agent, so a browser in web application development, and also the assistive technology. So all 3 things need to be built to the same set of guidelines in order for something to kind of be robust and actually work. This is why Oracle don't actually kind of say certification or we don't, for example, certify that certain screen readers will work with Apex or with any Oracle product, because there's things that we don't have control over. We could build it to standard, which is what we aim to do, build it to the guidelines that we follow. But if there's a browser bug or a JAWS bug, it may not work. So it's sort of a sort of a combination of all of those 3 things that need to come together in order for something to work properly. And our job as Apex or web developers is to build to the guidelines that we adhere to, and leave the sort of assistive technology and browser developers to kind of follow what they need to do. So they're the 4 principles. So within Apex, here are some of the key accessibility features that we provide for you to help you build Apex applications that are accessible and open to all. So we have a set of accessible UI components. They're tested to the Oracle guidelines, updated all the time. In 18.1, we updated the autocomplete item to use the JET input search form control, which has far greater accessibility than the previous jQuery-based autocomplete item had, and constantly making improvements to the look and feel, the theming of these components, and fixing accessible, both general but also accessibility specific bugs. So theming. So with, starting from Apex 5, we introduced the universal theme, which was a huge leap in terms of allowing you to build accessible, responsive, and beautiful looking web applications. Very easily to customize, both for developers with themes and theme styles, but also for end users through things like theme style switching, so that end users can now easily switch the theme, the look and feel of their applications. We'll show you an example of that a little bit later on. Also, no modes required. So prior to Apex 18, 18.1, we required that you had, there were 2 accessibility modes, screen reader mode and high contrast mode. As of 18.1, we deprecated those modes. So not to say that we're no longer accessible, of course, but to say that we are accessible out of the box without needing to enable these modes. So, so that's, they were just sort of caused a lot of trouble because they would be forgotten to be switched on. And it was just an extra step for both developers and users to take, and really only necessary a few years ago when we didn't have things like the updated WCAG 2 guidelines, the way ARIA, which is the set of guidelines for rich internet applications. So things like, tree widgets and splitter controls, all these sort of modern web widgets. We now have the guidelines through way ARIA to build to the accessibility standards. So no need to have these modes anymore. So that makes things a lot easier. And also now new in 19.1 is a customizable development experience with dark mode. You may have seen that in the office hours a couple of weeks ago when we talked about the early adopters and 19.1 new early adopters instance. Dark mode was introduced, and that can be great for, again, that's one of those things that scales nicely out, right? So you have, a use case would be to work at night for someone with no visual impairments, but it also, if someone is light sensitive or has sensory processing issues or perhaps dyslexia or other triggers, having less screen glare can really benefit those cases as well. So that's now available in 19.1. So one key thing to remember is, where possible, stick to the framework. You basically get all the work that we've ever done and will ever do in terms of accessibility for free. And you don't need to, the minute you start introducing custom, I'm not saying don't use custom plugins or don't step away from it if you really need to, but your life's going to be much easier when you stick to the framework. We go through quite a scrupulous sort of testing and build accessibility in from the start. And that's definitely not going to change. So so if you stick to the framework, you benefit from all that work automatically, which makes for an easier development process and an easier maintenance process, obviously. So stick to the framework. Developer assistance. So we provide some checks in the advisor built in. There's a category of accessibility checks built into the Apex advisor. The advisor is a utility within Apex that helps you to kind of spot QA issues in your applications. And there's, since 18.1, there's an accessibility group of checks, I think 7 or 8. Things like items with missing labels, for example, would be flagged there. That's not to say that if you run that and it passes, that your application is accessible. It's just a good first step for every developer to run as part of their development process to catch any obvious issues early. Universal theme contrast checking built into the theme roller. So if you're creating custom theme styles, the theme roller has contrast checking built in. So it will show you a little tick if your text on background combinations meet the WCAG 2 color contrast guidelines. The theme styles that we ship with, Vita, the default theme style, is accessibility tested So you don't need to worry about testing that. But if you are creating your own custom theme styles, then that's a nice way to check what you're defining meets the guidelines. And also new, around the time of 18.1, we introduced the accessibility guide, which helps you develop accessible Apex apps. And we're going to touch on many of these things as we go through today. And there's a link here, obviously, when you look at the slides to take you to the guide. So other useful resources, there's Oracle's accessibility guidelines. There's our VPAT, which is basically our statement of how we meet the Oracle guidelines. And that includes any significant defects. So if you are assessing Apex for accessibility, you want to kind of see what issues you might hit, what areas of functionality you may need to avoid. The VPAT is the place to look. And as of 19.1, all of the accessibility issues will be listed in the VPAT. Prior to 19.1, we would only list the severe ones, and we would list all of the other issues in the known issues in the release notes. But for simplicity, for 19.1 and going forwards, we're going to list all of it in the VPAT. So you only need to look in one place. Okay, so let's have a look at our sample. Right, so this is a very standard universal theme-based Apex application. I'll give you a quick overview first. A sort of a home page with a search field. There's a couple of kind of dashboard style charts. There's an employees page which shows an interactive report on the employee information. And there's a form page which links from the edit link of the form. And we have an administration page for administrative tasks. Okay, so let's kind of put this through its paces in terms of accessibility. So if I just move this. So the first thing that I would highlight is that Universal Theme provides many things, and actually the default settings of Apex provides you with a great deal of good stuff, accessible content for free without really needing to do anything. So the minute you create a Universal Theme application, you get an accessible header, you have accessible menus, the navigation bar is on the left, the navigation section on the left is built to ARIA standards. The headings or the bookmarks are marked up with appropriate headings to orientate users who are reliant on headings like screen reader users. So you do get a good starting point. But there are things that can go wrong, which we will come on to in a minute. So the first thing I would do is to test with keyboard. So this is as I said, this is a very good kind of backbone of providing accessible content. So it's a good test to do first off. So the way that we test with keyboard is basically to not use your mouse. So you can unplug it, you can take the batteries out. If you're disciplined, you can just leave it there. But I find if you just leave it there, then you'll sort of instinctively go to it in certain occasions. So it is an idea to put it somewhere else and take the batteries out, hide it, whatever you want to do. We'll tab to the first piece of content. And now, one of the things that's new in 19.1 is you get a skip to main content link. And this is a good technique for keyboard users to bypass the repeating navigation on the page. I can tab past it if I want to go to the start of the tab order on the page. So my keyboard focus is currently on the menu on the left, the expand and collapse button. But the first thing in the tab order is this skip to main content. And if you hit enter, it will take you past that repeating navigation. So it's a good way to avoid, prior to this, you would have to tab through everything. You know, you'd have to tab through. So it might be 5 or 6 or however, you know, a different number of tab stops before you can get to that first content. It's never visible if you don't hit tab when you first get to the page. So typically, mouse users, general use, unless someone is really using the keyboard alone, they wouldn't see that link. But as soon as they tab into that page, we show them that link and they can skip that repeating navigation. So that's a good kind of example of it's not our technique, it's a general accessibility technique, which kind of folds nicely into the page without disrupting the use for different users who use the mouse, for example. So that's good that that's there now. That was missing prior to 19.1. We can tab to the, we can see where the focus is on the page. So we're currently focused here. We can tab to the chart section. We can use the cursor keys to move around the different data points in the chart. Likewise for the pie chart. So we can move around, we can see where we are, and we can operate all of the content on the page. So that's good. And it is worth mentioning, if you're testing your own Apex applications, although you might check our content as part of your validation, they have been through this process with us. And you definitely don't need to repeat the same tests on different pages. So once you've been through the header, the footer, the navigation, maybe an interactive report region, different types of components, you'll find your testing footprint gets smaller and smaller because you're really just looking at new things on different pages. So, so yeah, that's why kind of a lot of the things that come up with accessibility issues with applications that we test that come up are sort of custom content where a custom plugin is used or custom JavaScript library, some custom functionality that's not been through our testing, which presents issues. So again, stick to the framework and you'll avoid that sort of thing and make your testing easier. Okay, so keyboard is good. I'm now going to show you a few other techniques, one of which is built right into Chrome. And we'll try and find some of these issues that have been hidden. Within Chrome, they have an audits tab. And within here, there's an accessibility testing audit built right into Chrome. So if you use Chrome, then you've got it for free. This uses Axe, the underlying Axe library, which is a popular and well-known library for accessibility testing. We actually use it for our internal testing, for our internal tools as well. So it's similar to what we use internally to test for accessibility. So yeah, so that's run that accessibility audit. We can see here that we've got a score of 83%. So what's going on? The first thing it says is form elements do not have associated labels. And if we look at this, sorry, my page is taking a little while to reload here. This is actually taking us to the this input element here. And basically the problem is that although it does have placeholder text, it doesn't have a label. And just placeholder text is not sufficient for an accessible label. So, so we can easily fix this. And you might not want to show it visibly, but you can have a hidden accessible label. And I'll show you how. So we'll go to edit this. So we can see here, we've got the search item, which is a text with autocomplete. There's no label, and we have enter employee name. So yeah, so what we can do here is very simply define a label here, say search employees. And we need to specify a label template, which will keep us hidden. So it's not visible. It fits with the design that we've already got on the page, but it's going to be there for assistive technology as a way of labeling the field. So we save this. Okay, and we can see here now, oh, it's still loading, sorry. Okay, so if we rerun the audit, and let's see what happens. So our score last time was 86, I think. Okay, so it's gone up a good amount, 94. We can no longer see this label issue, so we fixed that. It has an accessible label. It's not visible, but it's there for assistive technologies. We also have another issue here, which it's saying is contrast. And unfortunately, we have found that these tools do create false positives quite often to do with contrast. I think it's just no fault of the tool, but it's just very difficult to test reliably, automatically contrast because of the different ways that CSS can provide backgrounds. So, and if we actually spot check this, so this is referring to this particular element, the customize link. And Chrome does also provide a way of spot checking contrast built into the dev tools. So if we inspect that and then have a look here in these styles, we can click on there. And actually this here, contrast ratio, is a way that you can spot check things. So that shows us that the ratio is 4.73, and that does actually meet the minimum of 4.5 to 1 for small text. So in this case, that's a false positive from the toolbar. But yeah, it can be a good, you might need to spot, it might spot some obvious issues where the background can be computed successfully. But in this case, a spot check has revealed that it's actually a false positive. Okay, so we've fixed the placeholder text. We've ruled out this other check. So I'm happy with that page in terms of the toolbar output. We could also run the Apex Advisor on this page. That would have told us about this issue with the placeholder. That's fixed now. Now we can move on to like manual inspection of the page. And one of the nice tools that one of the nice things that you can do in Chrome as well, without any other tools, is to test zoom. So if we zoom into 200%, which is the sort of benchmark for what the WCAG 2 guidelines provide, and we can test with that as well. So we can see that we can still access the chart labels. We can see all of the chart content. Nothing's been cropped off prematurely. The menus should still work. So if we open the menus, that's all fine at 200%. So I'm happy with that. Incidentally, this is one of those things that scales well as well. So typically, Zoom has crossover with responsive design. So if something is designed well to work on smaller screens, then that can also greatly benefit users who are zoomed in, because you have the same kind of collapsing of content and a similar set of considerations for responsive design. So yeah. So let's come out of that. In Chrome, it's just Command or Control plus or minus to zoom in, and then Command 0 or Control 0 to go back to the default. I do actually like to be zoomed in a little bit, so we'll stay at like 125. Okay, so that's Zoom. Let's have a look at another tool, which is, so this is the sort of, we've looked at the keyboard uses, we've looked at kind of an automated toolbar test. Now we're looking at kind of manual inspection. We've done Zoom. Now I'm going to show you how to kind of look at the headings on the page. And there's a good little tool called Totally, which is TOTA11Y. There's a link in the slides. And you can basically embed that on your Apex page, and it will give you this set of tools to help you. One of which is really nice, is it sort of allows you to visualize the headings on the page. So here we click that, we can see down here the headings on the page. So we've got a level 1 heading, accessibility demo, level 2 employee salaries, and level 2 department counts. The developer toolbar is a heading 1 just for development purposes to allow you to find that quickly, but typically you wouldn't have more than one H1 on the page. That would go against guidelines, but we felt it was acceptable in development mode to allow you to quickly find the toolbar. So the way that you test headings is to sort of look at the page visually and think, okay, do the headings kind of accurately represent what is on the page? So here we've got this, which is accessibility demo for the H1. That's good. That's the first unique content on the page. It's a good place to start. We've got 2 H2s for the salaries and department counts, but what we're missing is this search field. This is in a region, but it's not marked up in a way that produces a heading on the page. So actually that could be missed by people reviewing the headings. And it's a very common way for people using screen readers to review the page and to get a kind of a feel for the page is to look at the headings. It's like a kind of a map of the page to orientate themselves. So if something's missing, or if there's content that's not marked up with a heading, it could very easily be missed by someone navigating by the headings, for example. Okay, so let's fix this. So if we close this down. we'll edit the page. This is this filters region. And actually I had to work quite hard to make this broken. The default would be fine, but I set it to a blank template, which doesn't have any headings. But if we set it back to the standard region template and set it to be a hidden but accessible. So that means that the heading is still visible to assistive technology. If it's hidden, then it would be completely hidden, both visually and to assistive technology. So hidden by default, standard region template. Let's save and run. Okay, so now if we go back to our totally heading visualizer, we can see that we've now got this filters region appearing as a heading 2. So that would be hit first, then the user would go on to the other heading 2s. Okay, so that's good, that's fixed. Let's show you quickly another type of manual test. So this is a sort of a test of color dependency where you don't want to rely on color alone to indicate content or functionality. So this chart, for example, it works fine for people with without any kind of color blindness. But let's use one of the Mac tools, which is to basically switch everything to grayscale. There are browser plugins that do this across different platforms, but Mac has a use grayscale system preference. And if I enable use grayscale, then this will basically turn off the color on the screen. And it's a good way, it's just part of testing, but it's a good way that you can visualize what content might be problematic. RAG reports are another great example where you've got status indicators where, you know, red, amber, and green. One of the most common types of color blindness is between red and green. So a RAG report where it only indicates the status by the color of the traffic light or whatever, is inaccessible to people with color blindness. So it needs to be shown in some other way. Perhaps it's a text status as well. Perhaps it's with an icon that indicates the status, but something else. It's not to say you can't use color, but it's to say that you shouldn't rely on it as the only way of determining something. So here, for example, what we can do is tweak the chart settings. If we go to the chart and we enable labeling, this will actually show a label in the chart or next to the chart section. And that should help us get around that issue where, okay, I've done the wrong, I've chosen the value and not the, sorry, the percentage, not the label. So let's just change that to be the label. Run the page. Okay, so there's a slight inconsistency with the way the label is because it's a longer label, but we do provide that content in a way that doesn't rely on color. So we could tweak those settings further, but just to show you what to be aware of, some of the places this can come up. So I'm going to turn off grayscale for now. And yeah, so that's that page. What we would do at the end of this is some screen reader testing. So I will do that now. Actually, let me just make one more. I'll go to one more page. And we will, I wanted to show you a common issue with report links. So this is, again, a separate page. We would use the keyboard again to try and activate different things with the keyboard. This is the interactive reports have got are fully keyboard accessible now. You can do everything with the keyboard. So we can move around all the menus, escape to close the menus. So that's all good. But one thing that I wanted to highlight, and which the Chrome audit tool would highlight for us, if we run it on this page, is these edit links. And edit links can come up sometimes in Apex applications. They need to have a unique link text. But worst case scenario, it would be what I'm going to show you here, which is where they've got no link text at all. So we can see the audit tool has said, okay, links do not have discernible name, which basically just means there's no link text. So a screen reader user, for example, trying trying to work with this page and trying to edit certain records in the report would have no easy way of knowing which link corresponded to which record. They'd probably have to go into the table, stay on the same row to try and determine which row they were editing. Not a good user experience. So the audit tool has highlighted that for us, failing elements, all of these links, and they basically, let's follow the link, okay. They basically don't have link text. So we can easily fix this by going into Page Designer, go to page 2. And if we go to the employees report attributes, here we can see the link attributes, and you can see an empty alt text, which is basically a way of saying that this is the image, the pencil image, and the alt text of the image functions as the link text that surrounds it. So this is the reason why the links have no link text. So if we give the image alt text, which we can say edit, and then the actual employee name specific to that row, that provides a much better user experience for someone who's just going to review the links on the page, and gives each link a unique name specific to the row that it appears on. Okay, so we're going to rerun that page. Actually, what I'll do is, to save time, I won't run the audit again, but I will just run this totally extension. And that allows us to easily, it's another great little feature of this extension actually, is you can do screen reader wand, and then you can hover it over certain elements on the page, and it will give you sort of basically what a screen reader would say. So it looks at the accessibility API, and it kind of determines the name that's associated with the element and shows that for you. So it's a nice little spot check to see what a screen reader user would hear. And here you can see we've got edit King, edit Blake, the link text specific to the row that we're on. Okay, so for the last 5 minutes or so, I'm going to switch to VoiceOver and show you what it sounds like for a screen reader user. So we'll switch to VoiceOver. I'm going to make my screen share a little bit bigger because I want you to see what VoiceOver is telling me. Sorry. Okay, apologies if this gets a bit small, but I felt it was a good way of showing you what VoiceOver is telling me. So, so yeah, we're in Safari. So, VoiceOver is the Mac native screen reader software. It works best with the native Mac browser, Safari. So we're going to enable VoiceOver.
VoiceOver on Safari. Accessibility demo login. Sign in window. Username. Edit text with autofill menus. Keyboard focus.
Okay, so that's told us that we're on the accessibility demo login page. We can type in Anthony and password.
Y. Password. Sign in button. Main. You are currently on a button. To click this button, press Control Option space. Processing.
So we're going to log in now.
You are currently on web content. To enter the.
Okay, you can hit Control to stop VoiceOver talking, which can be useful when you know what the page is.
Has left the meeting. Web area. Press Control Option Shift down.
Okay, I've got notifications from VoiceOver when everyone leaves a meeting, so that could be interesting. So yeah, so we're what we're going to do. One of the good things that you can do in Safari is
Phil Senior has joined the meeting.
Is the web rotor. So you can do Control Option U, and that will show you. Basically, it's a way that a screen reader user can navigate the different elements of the page. So if we go to our headings.
Headings menu. Heading level 1, accessibility demo. Heading level 2, filters.
So that's the one that we added, right? So if that was still using that hidden.
Shaggy Belmar to everyone. 3. That should be the default behavior. You can see this in the UT sample app as well. Apex Oracle Combat.
I hadn't anticipated that it was also going to read out the chat from from, let's just stick with it. So it's reading out the headings. This is the one that we added. It's a great way that a screen reader user can orientate themselves with the page. We can immediately see there's a filters region.
Heading level 2, employee salaries. Heading level 2, department counts.
So that's good. So it's telling us, so we can easily go to those specific sections on the page. What we're going to do is go to the report page.
Exit link. Skip, expand / public has left the meeting. Data visualizing. And has left the meeting. Menu pop-up link. Link. Employees. You are currently on a link. To click the link, skip to main content.
Okay, so we've gone to the employees report
She has
page.
joined the meeting.
We'll use the web rotor again.
Link. Skip to main content. Head expand / collapse navigation. Expanded button.
And we can see the headings on the page again.
Heading level 1, employees.
So heading level 1 is the default. That's a hero region on this page.
Heading level 2, employees report.
Heading level 2, employees report, which is the hidden but accessible region title for the report. And if we have a look at the links on this page, this will help.
Form control tables landmarks menu. Oh, no item. Links menu.
So this is, you can review all of the links on the page. So if someone just wanted to edit, a specific record, say edit Smith, they could hit E to go to everything all of the links that start with E.
Loading. Link image. Edit king.
ED, so all of the edit links. So we can very easily
link image. Edit Smith.
go to that record for Smith.
Left the meeting.
And we hit return, and
Link
that activates the link.
Edit Smith. You are currently on a link inside Smith. Main. Heading level 1.
Okay, so we come on to the form page. And this again is, default Apex. As long as you define labels for your fields, stuck to native controls, you should get a pretty good experience for screen readers by default. So let's just have a quick look at that for the last minute or so.
A hashtag has left selected. Smith. Content selected. Name value required. Required. Edit text. Main.
So that says
You are currently on a
Smith,
text field. To enter text in this field.
it tells you the contents, the label, name. It tells you value required, so that you know it's a required field. And we can go through.
Pop-up research. 800. Content selected.
I'm going to show you.
Salary. Edit text. Oracle.com has left the meeting.
We were going to enter some invalid entry for the salary.
Yeah. F. Jansob chat has left the meeting. You are currently on a text field.
We're going to apply those changes. So we can use the web rotor again to find the apply changes button.
Links menu. Or lab form controls menu. Apply changes button. 2 items.
So use the web rotor to go to the form controls, and then we can find the apply changes button in form controls.
Apply changes button. You are currently on a button. Pros 2. 1 error has occurred. Salary must be numeric.
So this a good case of where we've used ARIA to enable us to tell screen reader users that an error has happened. So this 1 error has occurred, which is the default notification in Apex, is implemented with an ARIA live region, which means that as soon as it's on the page, it will be announced to screen reader users so they can easily see if an error has occurred and they can go and fix it. Okay, so I'm going to cease the demo there. I need to wrap up and then a few minutes for questions, I'm afraid. I'm sorry I haven't left longer. Okay. Right then, so let's wrap up. So there's a list of all of the testing tools and techniques that we just saw. The Chrome is a great place to start with the zoom and the development audit, the spot checks, the color contrast checking. Keyboard, which you'll have, is a good place to start. And also some of those plugins are great and wonderful if you can get stuck into some voiceover testing or screen reader testing as well. That would really it sort of puts the icing on the cake in terms of accessibility testing, but is an integral part of the testing process. A few words of advice. So it's sort of trying to foster the message that it's not really an optional requirement. But not necessarily everyone will be on the same page, so there might be some resistance. Certainly, but if it's sort of built in from the start, considered as part of the development process, it's a much easier sell. much easier to fix as well, from the start than it is with some sort of lawsuit down the road, or some requirements come in, new set of requirements that come in where you need to meet the standards. Educate the whole team, so it's too much for one person. Start with one person, but then it needs to, everyone should really be doing keyboard, toolbar, the basic types of testing. Perhaps one or two people specialize in assistive technology, but if everyone's looking at the basic set of testing, that can help enormously. Build it from the start and engage with your users. The users are by far the most invaluable part of the testing process. You should do your due diligence first. Get all of your testing, including assistive technology testing, before asking users to do specific testing. But yeah, invaluable to get that feedback from users and to listen to your users. So just to recap, it's not just about the 15%, it's about everybody. It's not just that fixed set of people with fixed disabilities, but could affect anyone at any time in their lives, where these sorts of good design principles can really benefit everyone in different situations. Question the myths that we talked about, engage with your users, and please stick to the framework where you can so that you can benefit from what Apex provides and make your life easier going forward. And I think that wraps it up. So I've not left a lot of time there for questions, I'm afraid, but perhaps we could answer a few if there's still time.
Sure, Anthony. So one, and this is actually for me, because I always feel that like security and globalization and accessibility, they're always like afterthoughts, right? No, right? Everybody wants to retrofit them. Like how I can introduce security issues in my Apex app. Can I easily introduce accessibility issues in my Apex app? And what's your advice for people who use Apex?
Yeah, so I think it is possible. Like certainly some of those situations with headings where we should have, where you should ideally have, a heading 1 and then properly nested headings like heading 2s and heading 3s, all nicely nested within each other. Our current templating system could lead to a situation where there might be no heading 2s on the page and there might be some heading 3s depending on the template that's used. So things can creep in like that. But yeah, if there's just sort of easy ways that these things can be checked for with some of the tools that we talked about. And it's just sort of it just requires like a kind of a specific way of looking at the application. In an ideal world, we would create a framework which didn't need any kind of thought by a developer in order to make it accessible. But there will always be things that sort of creep in. Maybe it's labels that don't quite provide enough meaning. Those sort of edit links in reports, that's not done by default currently. You do get, I think, an edit text, which is linked text, but it's not unique linked text. So there's ways that we can improve the framework to make that easier in the future. But yeah, just things to consider to avoid some of the common pitfalls.
Thanks, Anthony. I know we're 1 minute over, but we have one more question here from Joel from Ohio. Are client-server applications typically not accessible? And is this a compelling reason to consider moving them to the web, would you say?
That's a good question. I think no, I think it was entirely possible to make client-server applications accessible with the right with the right approach. I haven't got any personal experience of that, but yeah, we have had people in the past ask about accessibility of Forms apps and moving to Apex. But I don't think it's any harder in Apex to do this, certainly, and with modern web standards and things like modern tree widgets and Page Designer, which is full of sort of rich menus which all meet the accessibility standards. We can really unlock a full a sort of a new world of rich controls, which I would argue would be a better user experience than a traditional client-server application. So things like interactive reports, which provide a wealth of functionality, they're built to the modern guidelines and they're accessible. I think so I think you've got a potential there for a much better user experience, but just things to consider in order to make it accessible.
Okay, thanks, Anthony. I think we're going to wrap up here. It's 2 after. I think this was a brilliant session. To everyone on the call, thanks for attending. This recording will be made available in about a day or so. And I encourage you to join us in about 2 weeks' time on March 7th as Mark Ziefs and Dr. Christian Neumüller from our team, they present social login with Apex. So if you've ever wanted to create Apex apps that authenticate with Facebook or Google or Okta or really any OAuth 2 or OpenID provider, you will not want to miss that session on March 7th. Thanks, everyone. We wish you a great day.